Now we're on to our next speaker. So I'd like to welcome Peter to the podium. Peter is the Head of Solutions and Innovation Asia Pacific at Suse. And he's going to talk to us about the edge, managing things at scale and hyperscale, and all of the things in between. Please give a warm welcome to Peter.
Thanks very much. Thank you. So yes, I created a very, very long title but as you can see, I like footnotes. So any Terry Pratchett fans here? Yeah, yep, good. There's usually a bit of a crossover between IT people and Terry Pratchett, so footnotes was part of the joy of those books. So thank you all for coming, and thank you for coming back. As you can see, I have the highly, highly valued post-lunch speaking slot. So this will be a fairly gentle presentation. I won't disturb your postprandial somnambulance. If you want to have a little sleep, I'll talk, softly, quietly. You can have a little doze. This is the first time I've been back to New Zealand for about, I guess, 2-3 years, I suppose, with all of the lockdowns and COVID and all those sorts of things. I'm based in Adelaide, in Australia, and I look after our team of pre-sales people who work around the Asia Pacific region for Suse. For those of you who don't know, Suse is the world's oldest enterprise Linux company. We've been around for over 30 years now. We nudged out the other guys by a few months, but we absolutely harp on about that at every opportunity. You might be wondering why we're here at a DevOps conference. Well, Linux forms the foundation of pretty much all of the things we're working on now, Kubernetes, containers, and so on. But we're also moving up the stack into things like Rancher for container management, NuVector for security, and so on. But I'm not going to talk about that today, not directly. What I'm going to talk about is what we're seeing from some of our customers who are working on the edge. What is the edge? We hear a lot about edge computing and what is the edge. So I'd like to introduce the idea of what is the edge and so on. But before I get started, I have to ask, what is up with all of the construction in Auckland right now? I felt like I had to come up wearing a high-vis vest. I mean, I was walking around yesterday, it's like every second person was in high-vis. What's going on? It's mental. I can't get from my hotel, which is 300 meters down the road, without going around like a 2-kilometer round trip to get past all. Well, I didn't actually snuck along the roads where it says don't. But anyway, it's just crazy. Anyway, I mean, good. You're going to get some new infrastructure, right? One day. One day. Yeah. But talking about infrastructure and so on, as I said, I'd like to introduce the topic of the edge, what it is, where we're seeing it, because my team, when we were talking about edge solutions and edge technologies and edge opportunities, my team was starting to get a little bit confused. What is it that we can do at this point? What does the edge actually mean? And so I put together a little presentation because a lot of what you've heard so far today has been great, and what you will hear later on is great. A lot of it's focused on how to do DevOps or the best way of working and all of that kind of stuff, which is fine and very, very useful. What I wanted to talk about was a little bit about what are the projects that are being worked on? What are the case studies we're seeing where DevOps is so vital and so important? So without further ado, let me take you on a little trip to Nuremberg. This is where Suse was born and where I grew up. It's a beautiful medieval city, as you can see. If you ever get the chance to travel to Germany, I do strongly recommend going to see Nuremberg. Our head office is just outside of the old city walls. And I would stay in a hotel on one side of the city, catch the subway to where the office was, and then I'd walk back in the afternoon back to my hotel, because it's downhill that way. The other way I would have gone uphill. But it means I go past the 14th century cathedral and the 13th century castle and through the cobbled streets and so on. And at Christmas time, the Christmas markets are just ridiculous. They're magical. You get anyway, I digress. We're a German company. We have most of our customers are in Europe, although we have a lot now in North America, especially in the federal space and so on. But yes, I wanted to just invite you to come visit Nuremberg if you ever get a chance. What I'm going to talk about is edge and how we approach the problem or the concerns of edge. And even in the cattle versus pets kind of argument, where you don't really care what the devices are or what the things are, eventually you are going to have to worry about how do you manage all of the things that you have at the edge. Because when we're talking about the edge, we're talking about lots and lots of little devices, physical devices. And it might be as complicated as a computer, it might be as simple as a camera or a thermometer or something like that, but they're all connected. This is really what the edge comes to. And I'll get a bit more into detail at the moment, but with apologies to Ali Brosh, the first thing that you want to do, or the first sort of reaction is, I've got to manage all of these things. I'm going to make sure that they're all up to date. I'm going to make sure that they're all secure, that they're all patched, that the code that's out there is secure, that it's got the right versions and all that kind of stuff. How do I manage that? The problem is, though, when we're talking about the edge, you really have to worry about scale. And understanding scale, as you can see, you might have a different view of what this little duck is. This little duck is actually about 4 stories high. And I took a picture of this in Hong Kong. If you don't understand the scale that you're dealing with, then the problem can get away from you very easily. So what are the software and hardware challenges introducing when you're dealing with edge computing at scale? Because in reality, where edge is useful, it is where there is a large scale involved. Now, why are we talking about scale? Why are we talking about edge? So this is projections from, I think, Forrester, of the number of connected devices on the internet, or internet-connected devices, or network-connected devices over time. And we're here in 2022. It's probably down a little bit, but as you can see, the flat line, the 8 to 9.5 to 9.9 to 10, that's non-IoT devices, non-Internet of Things devices. So as you can see, we've got several billion. These numbers are billions, by the way. We've got several billion devices, but it's staying pretty flat and it's projected to remain relatively stable over time. The Internet of Things, though, these little edge devices, is projected to grow exponentially. So right now, supposedly 16 billion devices. Within 3 years, 30 billion devices. That is a ridiculous scale. Billion with a B, it's a very big number. And just to give you an idea, a practical example of one of our customers, the reality of edge at scale. This is one of our customers with 15,000 locations around the world. Sort of factories and plants and so on. Each one of those, on average, has about 500 devices. Each one of which is doing its own little job. So there's 7.5 million devices to have to deploy, to have to orchestrate, to make sure that it's running properly, to swap out if it's broken, to manage the operating system, to make sure that it's actually doing the thing it's supposed to be doing. So that's one company, that's one problem set. 7.5 million devices is a lot. Even with the scripting, it starts becoming a very complicated and difficult thing to do. Because again, we're talking about real devices here. We're talking about, at the end of the day, there's some hardware at the edge of this. These aren't just cloud instances. So then the question becomes, do I have to manage all the things? Well, okay, how do I do that? So before I go any further, I'd like to define what we are talking about when we talk about edge at Suse. And we really have 3 components to this. We have the near edge, the far edge, and the tiny little bitty edge. Near edge devices are basically what's on the edge of your data center. We typically find these in the telecommunications companies. They're the network access devices that sit on the edge of the data center. So they're close into the data center, not actually part of it, but they form that gateway into the outside world. The far edge, where on a particular site you might have hundreds or even thousands of them, they're the furthest from the data center. They are at the branch locations, at the depots, the factory stores, whatever it happens to be, closer to the users, closest to where things are actually happening. That's the far edge. The tiny edge is all of the little devices which are then connected to that far edge. The tiny edge are the endpoints, the measurement tools, the thermometers, the cameras, the light bulbs, all of those, the industrial IoT, the components that are running maybe a conveyor belt system or whatever it happens to be. And that is where we get into the thousands of devices in a particular deployment or in a particular location. So as we go down this scale, obviously the devices get more and more simple, smaller and smaller footprint, but with the convergence of low power processing and with smaller technology and so on, as we all know, we can get much, much more computing power into a much, much smaller device. And we often want to be able to reuse these devices and give them new life. In the old days, edge computing, which still existed many years ago, any point of sale terminal is really an edge device. But in those old days, you would send out a firmware release, or you would do something physical to the device in order to give it new purpose. It also meant that your hardware was often very closely tied to the software, the application that was actually running. Now, with the advent of things like Kubernetes, especially K3S, lightweight Kubernetes, and with the advent of low-power devices, we can actually repurpose existing equipment, or we can do updates to that equipment using all of the good sort of methodologies we have, blue-green testing and all that kind of stuff, in order to update, manage, maintain these edge devices, potentially even tiny edge devices, in the field without having to have contact with IT experts. So that's our definition of what edge is. But let me give you some examples that we've seen in industry with our customers and others of what this actually means. What sort of applications are edge applications? Well, here's one. This is Home Depot. This is like Bunnings, but in America. Except I'm told they don't have sausages, so it's not really like Bunnings at all. I had some Americans in the audience when I gave this talk in Sydney, and they were like, sausages? What's that? And I told them, you've got to go this weekend, go to Bunnings. Forget going to the beach, go to Bunnings, get a sausage. They'll have the proper Australian experience. Do you have sausages at Bunnings here? Yeah, of course you do. Of course. Are you allowed to have onions on top? Oh, that's a safety hazard. In Australia, you have to put the onions underneath the sausage. They ask you, are you going into the store? They put their onions on the bottom. Someone slipped on an onion. Anyway, I digress. Home Depot is an example of branch-based edge devices. So Home Depot have 3 far edge devices in each of their stores as a cluster of machines running Kubernetes, and they run all of the automation components for all of the tiny edge devices that they have inside of each of their stores. They have something like 3,000 stores. They have something like 3 devices and then, dozens of devices hanging off those. So just the far edge components, we're looking at 9,000 devices to have to manage, maintain, update, make sure it's secure, and so on and so forth. The IT expertise on site at those stores is usually nil. So everything has to be done remotely. As you know, America has lots of natural disasters. I think because they make their houses out of cardboard and sticky tape or something like that. But they have lots of natural disasters. But the Home Depot's promise to their local community is to be up and running, within a day or days of those sorts of natural disasters, so that people can come and get more cardboard and sticky tape to put their houses back together again. So recovery, very fast recovery, is an important part of what they provide as a service, and their IT infrastructure is part of that. So being able to recover very quickly is important, and that's part of the edge requirements that they had. The other great thing is that because everything they're deploying here is based on Kubernetes and can go through that blue-green testing and so on, they can also replicate an entire Home Depot environment in their developers' world. So the developers are building their applications and making it all look and feel like it's running in a real store. So they can do that proper QA and proper testing and so on. So by the time it is ready to deploy out to the end branches, the end stores, they know how it's going to run. So that's one of the benefits of being able to deploy into containers rather than the old way of having to flash a device and send the application out and do all that kind of stuff. They've been able to do a lot more rapid innovation inside their stores. So from Home Depot, where they're running inside stores, to these are wind farms in China. Each one of these windmills has its own Kubernetes cluster inside. Each one of these windmills forms part of a network where obviously they have to integrate with each other, they have to communicate and make sure that they're sending the right level of power through the system and so on. So there's all the tools to measure that and monitor how the windmill is working. And the way they decided to do this was to run Kubernetes in clusters in each of these devices so that they could have that high availability, so that they could have that reliability, and so they could update remotely as well. So as you can see, there's a few there. Going and getting a ladder and having to go up and change the device every time you wanted to make a change, turn the power on, whatever you need to do, obviously that's going to take a long time. So that's why being able to do that remote administration is a lot more effective, a lot more convenient, I suppose. Here's another example of an edge device. Cows. I believe you have sheep here in New Zealand. These are cows. This is actually it's an Italian agribusiness that they have temperature, humidity, moisture, and other measuring devices in a very robust package. Basically, it's like a Raspberry Pi. That's everyone know what a Raspberry Pi is? It's a little computer in a very very robust package, a sort of ruggedized package that they put into the barns. It's all for animal welfare, making sure that they've got the right level of atmosphere, that there's not any noxious gases that are being built up for some reason. I don't know why they have noxious gases in a dairy, but they do. And again, this is done as a service. They package it up, run Kubernetes on top of that, and then send that out as a box to the farmer, who all they need to do is plug it into a PowerPoint, and it's running, it's working, it's doing its job, and they actually do the remote monitoring and do that as a service for them. Again, the IT expertise in the farms is usually not terribly high. They've got other things to do. They're rounding up the cows and doing all that kind of stuff. So having a device which is sitting out on a very remote location, needs to be updated with new information all the time, has a remote update process, and is in a very ruggedized kind of device. That's a very important sort of part of this. And being able to use, in this case, GitOps in order to do the updating and the maintenance of these things, reduce their costs by 50% over using their regular deployment that they were used to be doing. So cheaper devices, not specialized devices, and also cheaper in order of doing that maintenance that way in a very sort of organized way. Here's my next example. This truck is actually a mining exploration truck. So Schlumberger is one of the biggest sort of mining services companies in the world. They do exploration. This is called a logging truck. It's got nothing to do with trees. The logging they do is when they drill a hole at an exploration site. They're looking for minerals. They stick a radioactive probe down that hole, and then they send a whole bunch of signals, and they measure what the signals are coming back, and then they log the results of those signals. Now, in the old days, it used to be little squiggles on lines and reams of paper. These days, basically, this truck is a mobile data center, but it's a remote mobile data center. And as you can imagine, 1 day's worth of this truck is worth many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they don't want to have to keep bringing it in to the depot to have an update to the logging systems and the analysis tools that they've got in there. So being able to do this remotely via satellite, if necessary, means that they can keep this very expensive, very important money-generating tool out in the field, and yet the customer still gets the advantage of the latest updates, the latest innovations that Schlumberger is putting in terms of measuring the accuracy of their wireline logging. So another truck. This is a garbage truck in San Diego, where one of my colleagues lives. And like a lot of places, they have multiple garbage bins in San Diego. So you've got a garbage bin a little garbage bin for your general waste. You've got a green bin, you can have 2 or 3 of those, and you've got a recycling bin. They're all different colors. And what would happen is the garbage truck would come along, and they would pick up the recycling bin, for example, and they'd tip it into the truck, and then they'd let go, and the bin would go into the truck, and it would disappear, and never see it again. And then you'd have to ring up the council and say, or the garbage collection agency, and say, hey, you've stolen my bin. And then they would eventually get back to you. It was a very manual process. And this would happen. Your bin would get stolen like at least twice a year, I was told by my friend. At least twice a year, your bin got stolen, and you just went through the process. You rang someone up. And eventually they would get a bin back to you, 2 or 3 months later. And then it would steal it again the next time it came to pick it up. This went on, obviously, it was giving them a lot of grief in terms of the manual effort involved in, first of all, answering the phone to say, oh, it's stolen the bin again. Yeah, okay, I've got it. Yeah, all right. Where are you? Yeah, okay. All of that stuff was all very manual. So what they did is they put a camera on the arm of the robot there that's picking up the bin. They put a camera and they put some AI technology in the camera. Again, an edge device. So it works out in real time that, yes, I have stolen your bin. So now they cut out the part where you actually have to ring them up to say, you've stolen my bin. They go, yeah, we know, we've already stolen. Actually, what you do is you get a text to say, we've stolen your bin. But don't worry, we'll bring another one, right? So, and they've evolved this over time. At first, they realized, yes, unexpected bin in garbage area. And then they've evolved that system to now automatically going, yep, we know we've stolen your bin. You're going to get a new one the next time the truck comes around, rather than having to wait months and call us up and so on. So it's streamlined the process for their customers, but it's also reduced the manual effort that they had to go through and the expensive manual effort that they had to go through in order to receive the call, deal with the complaints and all of that kind of stuff. So this is another edge device because it's happening on the truck. It's happening on that arm connected to the camera. And this is another aspect of edge devices that we see. The whole point of the edge is the processing happens there. It doesn't send a signal back to the data center, something processes it and then sends a message back. It's happening there in real time. So you can take action much more quickly. You can take action when you're disconnected. You can take action when you're flying at 2 times the speed of sound close to the atmosphere. Does anyone know what this is? It's an aeroplane, yes. It's a what? A band from Ireland. It is a band from Ireland. Very good. So that's a hint. This is a U-2 spy plane. It is an edge device. It was first introduced in 1955. The last one was delivered in 1989. They are still being upgraded. So inside of that, it's like a mobile data center, really. They go very, very fast. They fly very, very high. The crew wear spacesuits. And what they used to do was take photos, and then they would land, and then they would, read the photos and develop the film and go, oh, that's interesting. We should probably send another plane over to go and have a look at that thing again. So obviously they have to go fly another mission and so on. Obviously very slow. The cameras on board these now, and I'm not giving away any sort of military secrets here, the cameras on board these now are a lot smarter than that. Okay, so the cameras themselves can choose to focus on objects and go, oh, that's interesting, I'll take more pictures about that to get the human to interpret later on. So while the pilot and the navigator are flying along at Mark 3 or whatever it is they fly, the surveillance systems are operating semi-independently. And again, they can be updated in the field. So wherever they happen to land, they don't have to bring them in and take them apart to put a new camera in, which has got slightly better optics or whatever. They just upgrade the software. So again, an edge device, again, running Kubernetes. Here's another great example. And this is just an illustrative picture. It's not actually what's happening, but it's not actually the company. But There's a company in Hong Kong that is doing a drone service to inspect buildings. Has anyone been to Hong Kong? Has anyone seen pictures of Hong Kong's buildings? Just to give you an idea of how tall their buildings are, I was on top of one of their tallest buildings and I was looking down and I could see there was this little ferry terminal down at the bottom. Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know there was a ferry terminal there. And then I saw this little tiny dot go towards the ferry that was sitting there, a little tiny dot going towards the ferry. And then I realized the tiny dot was the ferry. And the thing that I thought was a ferry was actually a cruise ship. That's how tall this 104-story building. If you ever go to Hong Kong, go to Ozone. It's a bar on the top of a 104-story. It's just, again, perspective and ideas of scale completely go out of your brain. 80-story buildings are normal in Hong Kong. 40-story buildings are small in Hong Kong. Inspecting those buildings for maintenance problems, leaks, problems with the drainage or any of those sorts of things, especially on the outside, is what you might call problematic, right, by hand. So this service has been developed, uses drones to fly around these buildings, checking them from the outside, looking for things that might be of interest. And that's where the edge AI comes in again. So the drones themselves are looking at all of the building, but they're not just filming the whole thing and then getting a human to look at it. What they're doing is they're focusing on things which it knows are a problem. So it's responding in real time to things that it is measuring. Again, this is one of the hallmarks of edge devices, responding in real time to in the location, not sending the data back to be processed and then have some reaction taken. So what this lets them do is really focus on the things that need attention, need to be fixed, rather than having to scan through hours and hours of footage in order to look for any defects that may be in that building. More examples, medical equipment. So as you probably know, medical equipment is subject to extremely rigorous standards. So once you get some hardware that has been certified to be used in a medical environment, you don't want to swap that out, right? You want to maintain that piece of hardware for as long as you can. And the great thing now we can do with things like Kubernetes and with container deployments and the DevOps associated with that is to extend the life of a lot of these very robust medical hardware systems. So by combining things like VMs, containers, lifecycle management, and so on and so forth, we can make better use of the legacy systems. And this is another hallmark of the edge devices. The edge devices are often hardware that needs to be maintained for a long period of time because it's going to be in a remote place. This is a bottling plant. This is Krones. Krones make bottling plants. So Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and companies like that use these devices, these huge production lines to fill their bottles. And they do it as a service as well. So Coca-Cola doesn't own the plant. They just lease it from Krones. And so they're constantly wanting to update it, make sure it's more efficient, more effective, and so on. The bottles go through at 40,000 bottles an hour at peak rate. So you don't want to stop that because that would be, I think the word is bad, to stop it when it's traveling at that sort of speed. Every element in this chain has some kind of industrial IoT device that's measuring, making sure that it's not going to crash into the next part of the device, make sure that it's actually doing the thing it's supposed to do. Is it full enough? Does it weigh the right amount? Is the temperature okay? All of these sorts of things. And again, what Krones are doing is using K3s, Kubernetes, lightweight Kubernetes, in order to make updates without interrupting the bottling process. So they can make an update and then flip over the application as it's running without having to significantly introduce downtime into the whole plant. And then perhaps one of the most extreme versions of the edge is satellites. So we've been working with a company called Hypergiant, and they actually make cube satellites and small satellites. And one of their experiments is something they called a potato in space, because it has about the processing, the power ability of a potato. So, you know, those potato clocks and things like that. It's got the power budget of a potato, but it needs to be able to run a processor, cameras, gyroscopes, all of these sorts of things. And so again, they're using Kubernetes, K3s, on something that's a bit like a Raspberry Pi with some jet boards as well, in order to give the ability to update the software that is then connected to the hardware that's hurtling around the Earth at thousands of kilometers an hour. This is a very remote device. It's pretty hard to get, you know, a service technician up to a satellite after it's launched. But what is apparently unique with these people, or very different about Hypergiant, is because they've taken on this approach of using Kubernetes, they can send updates, basically using GitOps Fleet. They can send updates when the satellite goes over an appropriate window in order to handle that sort of uplink. And this is interesting to me because only a couple of years ago, I was listening to a talk by some people in Australia that were developing satellites, and they were very proud about this new satellite they just created and so on. And I said, well, how can you update the software once it's up there? And they said, oh, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought about doing that. It's sort of so we know that they can make changes and updates to things like Voyager, and we've seen those sorts of things. But it seems like this being able to very easily update the software and roll back in case there is a problem is something that's relatively new, and especially with this kind of power budget. And then the final example is a telecommunications company in Europe. It's a very large European country with a very large telecommunications system, and their broadband connectivity is like a classic edge case. It has all of those components that I was talking about. It has the near edge right next to their data center, which is their telecommunications, their broadband entry point. Going to the far edge, thousands of devices, which are their broadband gateways, and then onto the hundreds of thousands of devices, which are the broadband access points for their customers. And they're using the way that they deploy these broadband gateways, which is basically a box inside the road, like, you know, about this big. It's like a mini data center. The box comes out with a technician. The technician opens up the cardboard box, puts the device into the thing by the side of the road, plugs in the yellow cable into the yellow slot, the green cable into the green slot, the red cable into the red slot, goes away for 5 minutes, has a smoke probably because he's in Germany, and then comes back, and in about half an hour's time, that box has been entirely set up. It goes from being completely blank to completely set up and ready to act as a broadband gateway with no other interaction from the technician other than plugging it in. And from that point on, all of the updates and maintenance and so on, I mean, so long as it doesn't catch on fire or get crashed into, all of the other maintenance that happens to that box can happen remotely. That's really one of the main hallmark of these edge devices. And in fact, that last little bit, that piece of having a blank piece of hardware, plugging it in and having that completely starting itself or bootstrapping itself is perhaps one of the most challenging things that we're facing right now. We had to do a little bit of fancy coding and consulting to make that work in practice. And, you know, as soon as you have a different kind of hardware, you have to change those codes and so on. So that's the last mile for us. How do we get that hardware software interface working in such an automated way? So like I say, the common themes of edge. What is edge? Well, it's these hundreds or thousands of tiny little devices. They're operating in remote areas. They're operating often in hazardous environments like space or cow sheds. They often have a very small footprint and a small power budget. They need to operate non-stop. So, you know, you can't stop the bottling plant to say, oh, hang on, I want to make that change again. Oh, hang on, sorry, I want to roll back that change. The bottling plant has to keep going. It takes a day to get it up to speed. So having the ability to use the technologies that you're all now familiar with, using Kubernetes, using containers, using lightweight components, are helping to drive this new edge, evolution and extrapolating amount of IoT devices that we're seeing. And like I say, the last mile that we're looking at now is that hardware config. How do we abstract that to a point where we can reliably just plug something in and then just go? And it's still a challenge because there's no sort of generic way of doing that really, but we're working on a few things, and hopefully in this coming year we'll have some interesting ideas in that space. Meanwhile, if you want to look at some of the projects that we use in order to provide these services and solutions to our customers, these are there. These are all open source projects: MicroOS, Uni, Rancher, K3S Fleet, Longhorn, so on, Opinio. If you don't know any of these, please just go have a look. You can find them at suseprojects.github.io. But if you'd like to know more, if you'd like to find out about Hypergiant or some of those other projects, I strongly can encourage you to go look at susecon.com. Susecon.com is SuseCon is our conference that we have. We used to run it as a live event, but obviously the last few years it's been digital only. But what that means is that every single demo, every single presentation, every single case study is available, and you can just get it for free. So I encourage you to go look at that, just to have a look at some of these case studies and maybe look in more depth at what's going on there. Community.suse.com is a great place to go and find out the latest about things like Rancher and so on. A great place to ask questions. You don't have to be a Suse subscriber. You just go and sign up for free and find out more information. I had a few people ask me, what's the latest on what we're going to do with Rancher and so on. This is the place to go. Every week there's a new demo, there's a new live event, and there's lots of Q&A that you can do there. The suseprojects.github.io, we are an open source company. Everything we do upstream first. Everything we do upstream first. So if you want to know what we're working on or what's coming up next, you go have a look at GitHub and you can find out. All of our projects are there in the clear, available for you to look at. And if you'd like to experiment yourself with edge devices, especially if you've got a Raspberry Pi 3B or newer, so a Raspberry Pi 4 would be better, go to Suse at Home, and there's step-by-step instructions how you can get your Raspberry Pi, put a micro OS on top of that, put Kubernetes on top of that, and start deploying applications on top, step-by-step, just go through it. And then finally, every year, at least once, possibly twice a year, we run Hack Week, hackweek.opensuse.org, and that's where our engineers spend a week just working on whatever crazy projects that they want to work on. Some of them work on documentation, okay? But some of them work on things like robots that walk around to pick up the toys that their children have left all over the floor and things like that. So there's a lot of very interesting projects in there, and we're trending more and more towards these edge kind of projects where, we're interfacing between, a camera, a local processing, and then take some action. So it's worth a look there as well. And if you'd like to be involved, it's not just a Suse thing. You can come and be involved and join our engineers in these projects as well. So I hope that was interesting to you. I didn't see too many people snoring, so thank you very much for that. If you didn't try the Gulab Jamun and they bring it out again tomorrow, you've got to have that, right? Have that. And then you can fall asleep for the thing after that lunchtime. But thank you very much. That's all I have. If you'd like to know more, please come and talk to us over in the presentation area over there. Otherwise, thank you. Have a good rest of the conference.